They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. If you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Hello, and welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Is former President Donald Trump's rhetoric encouraging or inciting political violence? Is that part of the reason violent threats and attacks have increased across the political spectrum? There have now been not one but two assassination attempts on Trump's life. Both candidates now speak behind bulletproof glass at outdoor events. After falsely claiming that Haitian immigrants are eating pet dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, shooting and bomb threats have forced evacuations and lockdowns at schools and hospitals. And 1 in 4 Republicans support political violence if the election is quote-unquote compromised. Is violence surrounding U.S. elections the new normal? To unpack the story, I'm now joined by USA Today domestic security correspondent Josh Meyer. Thanks for joining me on The Excerpt, Josh.
My pleasure, Dana.
Let's start with what's been happening in Springfield, Ohio. The estimated 12 to 15,000 Haitian immigrants who now call that small city home legally relocated there over the past 3 years. They've reversed a decades-long population decline and reinvigorated a manufacturing sector that was struggling to find entry-level workers. How does a place like Springfield recover from something like this?
The answer lies in how the local politicians are handling this. You've had the mayor of Springfield, you've had the governor of Ohio, and other people, calling out Donald Trump and J.D. Vance for lying about what's happening there and saying that the local Haitian community is welcome and that they came here for economic reasons and that they're a boon to the local economy and to the local community. So I think that that's a good start in sort of dispelling the myths and the lies, I think, and the political machinations that are behind this and making the people there feel welcome. They still have a long way to go, though. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of really heated rhetoric directed against the Haitian community there. And, Trump and Vance continue to target them.
Much of the Trump rhetoric around immigrants has been inflammatory. He's called them murderers and rapists. He talks about countries like Venezuela emptying their asylums and those people then migrating to the U.S. How are other immigrant communities responding?
Well, first, I think, one thing that we're trying to figure out is when Trump keeps saying they're emptying their asylums or their mental institutions, there's no indication that that's happening at all. And there is some suggestion that Trump just doesn't really understand what the word asylum means, which is there's, of course, political asylum for people, and there's asylums for people that have mental illness, issues like that. So, we don't even know where that came from. But I think other communities are trying to figure out how to respond to this. I think they're girding for political attacks. You've seen some of this spread to some other communities where the Haitian community is being targeted. It's also spread to other immigrant communities. And we have a story, I think, that's coming out in the next couple of days about how Trump is already laying the groundwork to blame immigrants in general for his loss should he lose on November 5th. So, this is a pretty tinder dry situation. And unfortunately, it seems like it's only going to get worse over the next few weeks until the election.
I want to talk about the two assassination attempts on Trump. While threats of violence against presidents and presidential candidates is nothing new, it's actually been decades since there have been public attempts on a candidate's or president's life. Is the Secret Service just not up to the task anymore? Is the violent rhetoric to blame? What do you think is the reason we're seeing more public threats of violence this election season?
Well, Dana, I think that this is a very complicated and complex situation. There's a lot of factors here. I don't think you can really point to any one thing here, but, the supercharged political rhetoric, I think, is part of the problem. Part of the problem is the Secret Service is basically really overwhelmed. It's understaffed. It has at least 400 open positions, and those are just the ones that were funded. I've talked to some people from the Government Accountability Office and other government watchdog groups who've said that they could use at least 3,000 more agents, trained agents, and one of the big problems is even the ones that they do have aren't getting enough training.
Let's talk about the two men behind these attempts against former President Donald Trump. Did we ever learn their motives? What did the two men have in common, if anything?
Well, in the first one, we haven't really learned. I mean, the law enforcement has not come up with some specific ideology or reason behind this. He seemed to be some, sort of very disaffected youth who wanted to do something that would get attention. He was initially searching for Biden and Trump rallies. This is before Biden dropped out in mid-July and Kamala Harris took over as the Democratic nominee. But in the second case, Ryan Ruth, we do think that there is a pretty clear pattern here where he was fighting. He wanted to fight on behalf of Ukraine against Russia. He wanted to really go over there and fight. And when he couldn't do that, he came back. And he was very agitated and felt that Trump was part of the problem and not supporting Ukraine. And he did leave behind a note saying, that if I don't succeed here, he hoped that somebody else would take over. So it's not necessarily Trump's domestic policies as much, but there is some indication that it's because of his support or lack of support for Ukraine and perceived support for Russia that led him to at least prepare to assassinate former President Trump.
Josh, as you know, the Trump campaign has repeatedly blamed the Democrats for inciting violence by calling Trump a threat to democracy. In an interview with the Washington Post just this month, Trump said, quote, "I really believe that the rhetoric from the Democrats is making the bullets fly," unquote. How have the Democrats responded? Are they willing to temper their rhetoric?
I think that, they're, trying to walk a tightrope here. I mean, there's a lot of people on the Democratic side. There's a lot of people in the media and elsewhere that believe that Trump is a threat to democracy based on, comments that he's made. But one thing that's important to note is that Trump and J.D. Vance, too, their rhetoric has been almost, or I could arguably, far more inflammatory against the Democrats, saying, if you vote for the Democrats, you won't have a country anymore. You need to vote for us to save America. And he's now really focusing on Kamala Harris as a threat to democracy, as a threat to the American way of life. He's called her a communist and all sorts of other names. So, the overheated rhetoric on both sides is really a problem. And I think the Democrats are trying to tone things down, and just focus on the issues. But part of the issue, at least according to the Democrats, is that Trump is a threat to democracy. So it's hard to sugarcoat that message, especially when Trump is being extremely personal in his attacks against them at the same time.
As our colleague Trevor Hughes recently reported, there's been a marked increase in threats of violence aimed at election workers across the country. How do we reverse this very alarming trend?
Well, I went to an election security journalism fellowship. It was a meeting for a couple of days with top officials from around the country, from the local level, from the state level, from the federal level. And it's a really serious problem. I mean, some of them in Michigan, which is one of the battleground states, it's also been a real focus of some of the most intense threats. I mean, this is, of course, the state where a group of right-wing extremists was arrested and charged with trying to kidnap the governor a few years ago. And so they're really trying to figure out ways to respond to this, from having security at the polling places, having a panic button even that state officials can respond to on a moment's notice, better training of poll workers and election workers and so forth, and even boosting security as much as they can to protect against this. But it is a problem, especially in states where there's open carry laws. There's a lot of talk on the internet and in social media about armed right-wing groups showing up at the polling places and checking on people to make sure they have the proper identification and so forth, and trying to figure out where their First Amendment rights stop in terms of trying to have a presence at the polling places, and where that's election harassment. It's going to be very tricky. And I think it's something that hopefully they've been planning on for months now, and it'll bear fruit at election time with good ways to alleviate problems.
Since the attack of January 6th, 2021, when a violent mob stormed the Capitol, Trump has called those who have been sentenced for their actions that day, quote, patriots. Trump has also vowed to release them from jail on his first day in office. Could that promise encourage further acts of political violence?
Yes, of course. I think it would, and I think that it probably has. I mean, they've even taped and circulated a rendition by the J6, the Patriots, singing the national anthem in jail. And Trump and his campaign are trying to make them into martyrs, into a cause célèbre. And when you do that, you're basically telling other people that it's okay to go break the law, and that, we've got your back, if we get elected. So that's a big problem, I think. So far, I don't think we've seen that play out yet. But again, we're a few weeks out from the election, and we're expecting sort of a very bumpy ride between now and November 5th. But as some of these election officials said at that recent election security conference I went to, the big problems could start after November 5th if Trump loses. So this could be almost a calm before the storm rather than the storm itself.
Meanwhile, according to the Public Religion Research Institute, it's a nonprofit research organization, 1 in 6 Americans say they support political violence for Republicans. That percentage goes to 1 in 4. Is it possible that seeing the January 6th insurrection has normalized political violence in America?
Unfortunately, I think it has, Dana. I was just up in Boston on vacation, and I took my kids to the Boston Tea Party Museum, and they do a reenactment of that. And it's really striking the rhetoric that some of these right-wing groups and pro-Trump groups are using and trying to cloak themselves in the, sort of wrap themselves in the mantle of the patriots from 1776. This, of course, is much different. This is not some illegitimate overlord from over, across the water. What they're doing is insurrection and according to prosecutors is seditious conspiracy. But the problem is that Trump and J.D. Vance and the campaign are doing their best to normalize this and encourage people that what they're doing is for America, not against America, and that they should be taking matters into their own hands and rising up against their own government if they don't like what's happening, and in the same breath telling them that they shouldn't like what's happening and that they should rise up. So it's very explosive, the rhetoric. And, I've talked to a lot of people, former security officials, current security officials, who are very worried that it could lead to violence, political violence.
Josh, finally, what will it take to get Americans to disavow political violence? Have you talked to any experts here?
In order to disavow political violence, you have to have people across the political spectrum, from the candidates themselves to other political figures supporting them, that have a degree of decorum and bipartisanship and support for democracy, and people saying that it's not, that political violence is not the solution here, that you have every right to express yourself and protest, and you have free speech and rights of free assembly and so forth, is enshrined in the Constitution, but there is no right to political violence, certainly no right to call for attacks on your opponents, or, God forbid, to take up a gun and try to shoot or assassinate somebody. So I think what you need is sort of a level set here in which everybody on both sides of the political aisle and across the spectrum are decrying political violence and not calling for it or taking steps to normalize it by, having campaign speeches in which you talk about it. But I think we're pretty far away from that at this point, and we have to just try to get through this election and see what we can do after that.
Josh, thanks so much for joining me on The Excerpt.
My pleasure. Thanks, Dana.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.